Okay, guys, the West moves east. By the late 1800s, European nations like Great Britain and France were growing more powerful. This is during their experience with the Industrial Revolution. One way for them to gain power was to take control of other parts of the world. Europeans had set up trading posts in Africa and Asia in earlier centuries. However, European countries were no longer happy to just trade with foreign lands. They wanted to own and control the areas. In the 1880s, European imperialism increased in Africa and Asia. Imperialism is when a country rules over foreign lands. So from 1880 to 1900, lots and lots changed in the way that Europeans treated uh, the places in Africa and Asia. Although African and Asian armies fought the Europeans, they could not stop the invaders. The armies and navies of the Western countries were too powerful. Also, old civilizations like the Ottoman Empire in Africa and Asia were losing power. Because the areas were weakened, it was easier for Europeans to take control of them. The Europeans took over the places they conquered in Africa and Asia, and they set up colonies. There were several economic reasons why Western powers wanted to control foreign lands. Now, these are going to be important notes that we're going to take. So, when we go to answer our notes on this, we're going to pay special attention to this. So, the first economic reason was manufacturers needed new places to get natural resources like rubber and oil. Okay, again, this is taking place during the Industrial Revolution. They also wanted new markets to sell their goods in, okay? The new goods they were making with their industrial machines. In addition, military and merchant ships needed places around the world to refuel. So they needed safe places to stock their boats so that they could do trade around the world. And that was the third economic reason. There's a fourth reason for imperialism. European nations thought that ruling colonies all over the world increased a nation's worth. Countries competed with each other to become the most powerful nation or the most powerful empire. For example, when France moved into West Africa, Britain and Germany quickly invaded the nearby areas. They took the lands to build up their own empires while slowing down the French. So it became a competition. A fifth reason for imperialism. Many Westerners thought they were helping the people in Africa and Asia. Some believed that they had a duty to spread the blessings of Western civilization to other lands. These blessings, as Europeans saw it, were medicine, law, and the Christian religion. Many Europeans thought Westerners had a humanitarian responsibility. That is, they thought they had to help. A humanitarian responsibility to bring civilization to what they called primitive people. Missionaries, doctors, and colonial officials worked to spread European ideas in foreign lands. Not all Westerners liked the idea of imperialism. Anti imperialists said that Westerners were hypocrites. As Western nations moved towards democratic government at home, they were ruling colonies in an undemocratic way. The anti imperialists did not think this was fair. They also said that imperialism helped Europeans get rich, but at the expense of native peoples. However, the imperialists were the stronger force. By 1900, most parts of Africa, India, and Southeast Asia were governed by European imperialist powers. So not everybody agreed with imperialism, but imperialism sort of won. That's the way things were done. Our first question here, in the 1880s, European imperialism increased in blank. I think the answer there is A, Africa and Asia. It increased in Africa and Asia. Who was losing power in the late 1800s? Well, old empires like the Ottoman Empire. C. The older empires were losing power. Western powers, that is imperialists, they wanted to take over foreign lands because what? Well, it was all of the above, and I'm going to state these again. They wanted natural resources, they wanted new markets to sell goods, and they wanted places to refuel. Okay? They wanted all this stuff because it's what helped make the Industrial Revolution continue, and it made some people very rich. So that's what they went for. Who said that the way Western nations were ruling colonies was unfair? It was the anti-imperialists. And there were whole countries that behaved as anti-imperialists, and then there were individuals within different countries that were anti-imperialists. By blank, most parts of Africa, India, and Southeast Asia were governed by European imperialist powers. That was the year 1900. So between 1880 and 1900, things went from, they did some trade with different people in Africa and Asia. In the next 20 years, they had really carved out and chopped up and started to rule over some of those areas. So it was a very sudden turn of events, but it had echoes that we still see today. We're still seeing people angry about these things. We'll talk about that as we progress in the unit. Two across, blank, is when a country rules over foreign lands. Looking back at our reading, this is at the end of the first paragraph, it's imperialism is when a country rules over foreign lands. Many Europeans thought they had a responsibility to bring blank to primitive people. 7 across. Civilization. Okay. Now, Europeans thought that civilization meant that people should live just as Europeans did, so that they should worship the same religion, they should eat the same kinds of foods, they should wear the same kinds of clothes, they should learn European languages. They would go into villages in Asia and villages in Africa, and they would really try to push this idea on people. And they thought they were helping. And in some cases, maybe they were. But Europeans really believed in this, quote, civilizing mission. So number 8, many Westerners believed they had a blank to spread what they called the blessings of Western civilization to other lands. These blessings were some of the same things we just talked about with civilization. Okay? The way Europeans lived and farmed and worshipped and did things. Number 9, by 1900, most parts of Africa, India, and Southeast Asia were ruled by blank imperialist powers. These were the Europeans. Okay? The Europeans are, in many ways, the focus of this history class because we teach it from a perspective, and our perspective is as Americans, and we're heirs to sort of a European worldview. So, but in this case, it was us who did imperialism. It was Europeans. Some of you might not count yourselves as Europeans, but that's the perspective of the discussions we do. Number 1 down, Britain, France, and Germany wanted to build up their own blank while slowing down the expansion of their rivals. This was their empires. They wanted to build their own empires. They thought the more territory that they could control, the more important their country was. They thought this gave their country something called prestige, which is just like street cred, or credibility. Number 3, European countries wanted to take over foreign lands for blank political and humanitarian reasons. It was the economic reasons. Okay? Economic reasons were the primary reasons for imperialism. They were the first 3 that we talked about there, and they were the strongest and most important ones, okay? And going back over those again, we'll go back up here to number 3, natural resources, new markets, and places to refuel. Those were very strong reasons why Europeans took over land in Africa and Asia. Number 4, although African and Asian armies fought the Europeans, they could not stop the invaders. They could not stop the invaders. Accidentally just pasted a link instead of covering that up. Number 5, anti-imperialists thought that imperialism was not fair. Wait, what did I just do? Oh, I skipped one. Yep, they thought it was not fair. I'm not fixing that right now. I'll fix it later. The armies and navies of Western countries were very powerful. Okay, so if you lived in a very small society in Africa and a great big powerful fleet of Navy ships from Britain showed up, you didn't really have a good chance of fighting back. Number 10, anti-imperialists said that Europeans were getting rich at the expense of native peoples. We talked about that. Okay. I'll fix that later on. Thought it was unfair. Now, this chart is important. This will be an important chart for you to use as notes on the test and notes on the quiz. There will be questions directly from this. Okay. A colony is a place where imperialism happens, right? It's a place that's ruled over directly by an outside power. Okay. Kind of like the way, Massachusetts Bay Colony or the colony of Carolina was ruled over by Great Britain, right? The original 13 colonies of North America, they were colonies. They were ruled over directly by Britain. But in imperialism, as it continued, there were other kinds as well. There was a protectorate, where a country has its own government, but that government is controlled by an outside power. So you would kind of leave the local government in place, but then the local government would have to sort of obey a foreign government. It's a protectorate. It's also known as indirect rule. We'll talk about that some more. And then the third kind, it's even more, a little more hands-off, is it's called sphere of influence. And it's an area where an outside power, like Britain, I keep picking on Britain, but lots of countries did this, an outside power would have exclusive privilege to do investment or trading there. So for example, the United States claimed all of Latin America, that is Central and South America, as its sphere of influence. The United States said, France, Britain, Russia, Germany, you guys cannot do business in Nicaragua or Bolivia or Brazil. It is the sphere of influence of the United States. Only we can go down there and do trade and business and try to make influence there. So that was the sphere of influence. So we really left the governments of those countries alone, except we said nobody else is allowed to go in and have influence there. And then finally, the most hands-off, but still way too hands-on, was economic imperialism. So where an independent nation is controlled by the business interests of an outside power. So, like a German company would own all of the farms in some country in Africa. Well, that would be economic imperialism. If some foreign country owns all of the farms in your country, they kind of control your country. And that's precisely what happened in Hawaii. Hawaii was its own independent nation. It was actually a kingdom at the time when the American Dole Food Company wanted to grow pineapples there. And in order to get the best deal growing pineapples there for the lowest, local taxes or whatever, they basically overthrew the Hawaiian government. Okay, so it's economic imperialism, and all of these still exist today. There are still colonies, although there aren't as many of them. There are still protectorates, although there aren't very many of them. There are more so than colonies. Sphere of influence is still very, very much a thing. Okay, You can just ask the Ukraine. Russia is still claiming the country of the Ukraine as their sphere of influence. And then economic imperialism is pretty much the way things are done around the world today. Okay, foreign companies try to own businesses within other countries all the time. It's just the way things are done. Question 1, what company controlled pineapple trade in Hawaii? It's here. It's the American Dole Food Company. Right? The Dole Food Company. Where did the United States claim a sphere of influence? It was in Latin America, also known as Central and South America, so Mexico and below, basically. So it's like it's America's policy, and it's especially used to be America's policy, that if another country wants to intervene, if they want to get involved in, say, Argentina, that we forbid them to do that. Like it would be considered almost an act of war for someone to come and to try to buy a business in Argentina. So the Russians wanted to do that, for example. We would look at that very, very badly. And what's the difference between a colony and a protectorate? This is important. This is definitely a test question. A colony is ruled by an outside power, where a protectorate has their own government, and that government is controlled by an outside power. I know that seems like a slight difference, but it's kind of like if someone moved into your house and started bossing you around, compared to if someone just started bossing your parents around, right? So it's indirect rule. They don't necessarily get inside and really get in the nitty gritty. They leave local laws in place. Here for the extension writing, hopefully you guys have this done. I'm just going to read the questions to you. Hopefully you guys can answer them on your own time, or one of them on your own time. Parts of the U.S. were once colonies that belonged to Great Britain. However, before Hawaii became a state, American businesses practiced imperialism in Hawaii. How do you think Americans felt about imperialism in the late 1800s? Question 2 is, what might happen to a culture in a country or area that is taken over by a foreign power? So if you're a person who lives in a small, less powerful culture, and some foreign power comes in and takes over, what do you think is going to happen to your culture or your country? And then question 3, a writer wrote that the sun never sets, that's in quotes, on the British Empire. What do you think the writer meant? What does it mean to say that the sun never sets on the British Empire? So each of those is an interesting question. The second two, I think especially, the first one it's kind of a long question. That makes it kind of confusing. But these are both interesting questions. I want you guys to write about those, okay? And I left you guys space to do that. And so that is our review of The West Moves East. I will post these notes until the quiz day. On the quiz day, I will remove these. You guys will have them there. And that's it. So your homework tonight is going to be over 6.2. It's a textbook section called Building Overseas Empires.